Appendix 1. The Living Love Theory of Happiness. 1. The problem. Most people are trapped in patterns of consciousness that result in widespread unhappiness, alienation, fears, continuous conflict, etc. Instead of realizing the cornucopia that life offers us, our programming creates lives characterized by tension and a low level of enjoying life. The way we currently process, interpret, perceive, and act upon incoming stimuli is responsible for our inability to be happy 100% of the time. We are all beautiful beings, but our lower consciousness security, sensation and power programming causes us to make ourselves unhappy. 2. Basic principle. Happiness varies inversely with one's addictions. Addictions are programmed expectations, demands, absolute necessities, desires, or models of how the world should be that automatically trigger negative emotions such as anger, fear, jealousy, anxiety, irritation, resentment, grief, etc. Every addiction makes one vulnerable to suffering. When one understands how the experience of happiness and unhappiness is generated, it becomes evident that all unhappiness is due to addictive models that determine our perception and motivation. Even physical pain does not produce unhappiness unless one has an addiction for being free from pain. It is the addiction, not the pain, that generates suffering. 3. The Predicament of Life. The changing energy stream of life in which we live satisfies some addictions and leaves others unsatisfied. In other words, we win some and we lose some. Even when we win, we then unwittingly create another addictive demand that must be lived out in a robot-like fashion. We usually attempt to change our win-lose odds by more money, knowledge, prestige, or power. These lines of endeavor never make enough change in the win-some, lose-some pattern to produce a high-level enjoyment of life. Our expectations and demands continue to dominate our consciousness and create an unsatisfactory experience of life as long as we have any addictive programming. 4. A dilemma. Unsatisfied addictions dominate our consciousness, make us unable to love unconditionally, keep our rational minds churning, lead our consciousness into futuring and pasting instead of enjoying the here and now, and make us trigger negative emotions in an attempt to manipulate the people in the world around us. The unfulfilled addictive demands produce the experience of suffering and unhappiness. The addictions we satisfy give us only brief pleasure. That which satisfied an addiction soon tends to form a new addiction that our nervous system indiscriminately protects and enhances. Regardless of whether or not we get what we want, we are still vulnerable to fear, grief, or anger that can generate the experience of unhappiness. 5. The Unworkable Solution. Our ancestors, throughout eons of jungle life, developed nervous systems that effectively guarded our species against external dangers. Over 99% of the people in the world today are stuck with nervous systems that usually operate by blaming the outside world for any problems they experience. We organize our perceptions and energies into trying to make our lives work by programming that is ultra-efficient at comparing the outside world with our inner addictive models, thus triggering emergency alarms of anger, fear, grief, frustration, or jealousy when they do not correspond. When we operate on lower consciousness levels, we trigger emotions that generate forceful actions in an attempt to change the outside world so that it corresponds with our security, sensation, and power addictions. The result is a roller coasting between pleasure and pain, which we try to ameliorate by increasing our skill at manipulation, meanwhile maintaining a social veneer of politeness, diplomacy, and a shallow degree of warmth and love. Conscious people always have a choice of whether to try to modify the actions of people around them or to change their responses to the incoming stimuli. 6. The Way to Happiness. The practical solution to the problem of continuously enjoying our lives is to retrain our biocomputer so that the first response to a life situation is to harmonize our energies with the outside world instead of trying to force the outside world to fit our inner patterns. Unconditionally loving communication, which is not addicted to results, will usually permit the adjustments to occur that we need for harmonizing our energies. Every addiction leaves us vulnerable, preferences enable us to continually enjoy life. When our biocomputers operate from preferential programming, our happiness is not affected, regardless of whether the outside world fits our preferences or not. This permits us to enjoy the here and now of our lives, to remain centered at all times, to love unconditionally, to avoid subject-object manipulation, to feel secure and invulnerable, to increase our insight and perceptiveness, and to feel at home in the world. When our biocomputers are retrained to interact with our world in these ways, we find that life gives us the optimum in security, sensations, power, and love. The living love way does far more than enable a person to passively adjust to the here and now of his or her life. It is a dynamic system for retraining one's consciousness to live an effective life that is continuously enjoyable.